Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have just an amazing show coming right up. Our first guest is none other than Kate Hamer, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, The Doll Funeral. Kate's very well known for her best-selling and award-winning book, The Girl in the Red Coat, and she's written articles and reviews for The Independent, The Sunday Mail, and The New York Times. So let's welcome to the show, Kate.
Thanks very much for having me.
You know, it is such a pleasure to have you here on the show. My goodness. This is just another great literary work coming from your desk here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so, I have to ask you, because it's quite an interesting, you're so good at what you do, and it's very interesting. How did you get involved in writing, thrillers, and how did you even get started on this path?
Well, I've been writing, really, as far back as I can remember. When I was a kid, I used to write stories and illustrate them and staple them together into little books and all that sort of thing. And I never really stopped writing at all. I always wrote short stories. I always had the ambition to write a novel. Certainly I wrote ideas and fragments and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't until about sort of 5-6 years ago I came to a bit of a crossroads in my career. I'd worked in radio and television for a long time, actually. Mm-hmm. And somebody just said, look, for once in your life, just do, what you really want to do. And I started writing my first novel, and sort of didn't look back, really.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. Your books have obviously been translated in all sorts of different languages, and gosh, your first book was such so well received that I'm glad that you went on to create this other book as well, The Doll Funeral. And so, looking back, was there a main inspiration when you started to create The Doll Funeral?
I think the way I work seems to come is more image-based than that, if that makes sense. Certainly with the first book, the jumping-off point was just having a very strong image of a little girl standing in a forest and knowing that she was lost in that image. Similarly, with The Doll Funeral, I had an image of a girl running through a house with her hair flying out behind her. She just had some good news. I wasn't sure what it was. And she runs out into this unkempt garden and just looks at the sky and starts singing. And that was the jumping off point for the whole of the book. And now where all these things come from, I'm not sure. But in both instances, it was that strong central image that sent me on the journey of the novel, really, to discover what it meant and what it was about and who these people were. And with my second book, The Doll Funeral, I very soon started writing the character and discovered her name was Ruby, and it's her 13th birthday.
Well, and I know in your book you go into, Ruby discovers some things. And can you share a little bit of the plot? We don't want to give it all away because, of course, we want people to pick up their own copy of The Doll Funeral. But just a little bit of an idea so our listeners can gain an understanding about this great work.
It's, as I said, it begins on the opening chapter is Ruby's 13th birthday, and she's upstairs. And her mother calls her down, and she knows from the sound of her mother's voice that something is up, that she's about to be told something, or, something's wrong, and her parents tell her that she's not actually their birth child, that she was adopted as a very young baby. Now, Ruby's life with these adopted parents has been a pretty appalling and brutal one, and hence the news that she's adopted seems to her like all her Christmases have come at once. And it kind of gives her hope, I suppose, for the future. So hence she runs out and starts singing with joy. So the reaction isn't quite what they were expecting. And then she goes on a mission to find her birth parents. But it's obviously it's never a straightforward or in any means easy kind of mission to go on, and Ruby starts uncovering very quickly all sorts of secrets that have lain dormant for years within her own family and with other people's as well. So it's a tough call for her, but she's determined, and I very much wanted to write a character who was brave, I think, really, and Ruby is very brave, and she goes through some terrible things, but she kind of hangs on to try and forge her own identity as much as possible, and that's one of the themes of the book.
Well, and I think it's such a great backdrop, because when you look at Ruby's story, it's a young girl who, has this big unknown, and she can really create life in any way, like herself and her life in any way that she wants, but it comes with also overcoming a lot of challenges and fears, as far as like, gosh, my parents aren't my real parents, I'm looking for my birth parents. And so there's this, she just has, and you said it very well, this creative, spirit that's going to go out there and figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that really interested me. It was this idea of, are we bound by the past always, or if we're really kind of determined and go through all sorts of trials, can we actually rewrite or write our own futures? And, even to the extent, are we always complete with the family that we're born with? Or can we actually go out and create our own families and our own futures and our own lives? And that's something I really wanted to explore. Ruby, as she begins uncovering the past, she's also destroying it in a way and freeing herself.
It's such just a inspirational story in some ways, because I think a lot of people can relate to that in one way or another, where they're looking to rebuild or reframe their future. Now, I have to ask, as you have a couple characters in there, Shadow and Moss Lady, and so how did those two come about?
Well, the identity of Shadow is sort of revealed right at the end of the book, and he's accompanies Ruby, and he always has done ever since she was small. And she kind of describes it a bit, because she's had this quite brutal upbringing up till now. She describes it herself as feeling like her eye has become cracked, and it lets things in that other people necessarily can't see. Now, Shadow is from the past, from the quite distant past. And as I said, it's sort of revealed, his role is revealed later in the book. But again, it's kind of this theme of, are we bound by our past? I had a thought I found very interesting was about our own ancestors. And I knew my grandparents. I knew the names of my great-grandparents, but beyond that, I have no idea what they were called or what they did or what they looked like. And yet, both genetically and quite possibly in other ways as well, maybe gestures or culturally or in family terms, I'm still being influenced by these people, as we all are with our distant ancestors. And I just found that a really interesting idea that how far the bonds go back, really, to people that we know nothing about. And, so I was very interested in exploring that.
Well, I think it's so fascinating. I agree with you. Like, I met my great-grandparents, and I remember them at a very young age. And it's interesting to hear some of the things that they go through and just to see some of those same traits that go throughout a family lineage, and so, and with your book, it looks to break some of that and kind of, redefine them or recreate them in some ways.
Yes, that's right. I mean, Ruby finds, is looking for family, really. She's desperate for family. And of course things don't work out as she anticipates in her fantasy, as they never do, really. But she finds another family that she thinks that where she can find refuge or a place. But it turns out that they've got an agenda for her being there that she's not aware of. So yes, and I think right at the end there's a couple of lines that run something like, are we able to sort of walk into a room and furnish the room as we want it furnished rather than what we've inherited? Hopefully Ruby's got a lot of agency, and hopefully the message is that we've all got a lot more agency in our lives than maybe we think we have.
Yeah. Well, and also your book, I mean, you talked about shadow, and we had discussed some of the characters. It has this very strong supernatural like undertones and elements throughout it. Is this something you've always been interested in?
Yeah, I think so. There's an element in the first novel as well as a slight supernatural element in the first novel. Yes, I think so. I was brought up on fairy tales when I was a kid, the Grimm's fairy tales, which really were grim. They're not the Disney versions. I had an ancient old Victorian copy, and they're all full of magic and murder and betrayal, and I think I was very, very heavily influenced by them at a very young age, and those influences never quite go away. So I think that's partly where it comes from. The novel I'm working on, having said that, the novel I'm working on at the moment doesn't really have an overt supernatural element in it. It's more about the power of the human mind, which is possibly the most supernatural thing we have. But I'm just drawn, I wouldn't say they're conventional thrillers, but I am drawn to the psychological thriller. It's what I enjoy reading. So I kind of naturally quite turned to that when I was writing. And yes, both the first two do have quite a strong dash of the supernatural as well.
I think it adds such great flavor to the story. It's easy to get lost in your books because it just has that flow where it's enough creativity that you can just kind of get sucked into.
Well, part of the struggle with the second book, which is always going to be a different experience writing a second novel, but was location, and I tried to write the story. I'd had the story for quite a long time and tried to write it in a couple of different settings that didn't quite work. And it wasn't until I discovered a place called the Forest of Dean, which is just on the border between Wales and England here, a little bit into England. It doesn't quite cover Wales, but and it's, when I discovered that, everything just fell into place, and I think it was a story in search of a location, really, and certainly the forest adds, for me, in the writing of it, added a huge amount, because the Forest of Dean, I mean, I don't know about in the States, but it's very unusual here to have a place where communities, 21st century communities, are living and working under the canopy of the forest, and that's what the Forest of Dean is. And it's a very ancient place as well. There's mining that goes back to the Iron Age there, and it was a hunting forest, and it's just a very, very mysterious, atmospheric, magical place. So once I had that on board, everything kind of fell into place. So I think, that's another thing I read for. I did a piece recently for LitHub in the States, all about atmosphere, because that's more than anything is what I read for. So the books like Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca or something like that, it's really, that's what draws me into books more than anything.
Yeah, it sounds like you have the perfect marriage of that, of the location where it just brings together the magic and the mystery, and so it sets the stage for all of that to happen. So people who have been there or are there, or even are thinking about visiting there, they can see how that all comes together.
Yeah, certainly, and I mean, forests are just amazing. I think if you've ever walked through one on your own, you know how atmospheric they are, and if you've ever walked through one at night,
oh yeah,
it kind of it really does can be quite creepy, so it just seems the perfect place, the perfect setting.
Yeah, I mean, you have to worry about the bears and the things that can get you at night.
Well, there's no bears here, actually. No, it's more creatures of the imagination, I think, here. But yes, I was recently. I was invited to the Moscow Book Fair, and we did quite a bit of travelling through Russian forests, and apparently they are full of bears there as well.
Well, sometimes the imagination can be worse than bears. Well, and you really had that nice balance of thriller and just intrigue. I really enjoyed your book. The Doll Funeral is just absolutely amazing. And you kind of touched a little bit, so I kind of want to go there. You're working, of course, on your next book. Is there anything that you can share with us about that?
Yeah, again, it's a psychological thriller. It's as I said, it's the genre that I enjoy reading, so it's natural for me to turn to that. It's a book set around 3 girls who are around 17, and it's really the sort of age where things can go quite badly wrong and off kilter. Given certain elements and certain happenings, and this is what happens. It's sort of a kind of mix of the 3's family circumstances and their relationships with each other, and so yes, I'm having a lot of fun with it, actually. I'm having a great deal of fun with it. There is a murder in it, so it's a little bit more psychological thriller, traditional psychological thriller, but I am really enjoying it. I'm really enjoying writing it, and I think it will be out in the UK probably not till 2019 now.
Well, it gives us something to look forward to, and I know your books are always woven so well that it allows the reader to really kind of get immersed in it and and feel that just that energy that goes with it, which is just extraordinary. Now,
well, I think it comes from character, really. I just, it's, and again, that's what I read for. It's just focusing so much on motivations of characters, and that's what interests me. It's that the human element.
It's so easy to see how some of the different characters will act different ways with your books, and you just get that so well done that you you want to see what happens next.
Well, I suppose that's in terms of reading, that's that's lovely to hear, because that's what you want readers, obviously, is to want to turn the page and read the next page and find out what happens. It's as simple as that, really. And it's really wonderful, actually, the fact of gathering readers, and the feeling that almost when the books are published and people begin reading it's kind of like handing it over a little bit, almost like the book doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the readers, and I feel that every reader brings something different to it, and it becomes a different book every time it's read, and turned into something else. And I mean, that's what I write for, really. It's a kind of communication.
Well, you can see you have a love for that, especially with your first book, The Girl in the Red Coat. I mean, it was absolutely just astonishing. And I have to ask you, do they have any plans to make a movie out of that?
There are. It's been what they called options, and there are plans afoot. I think it's a long and complicated business, movie making, so we'll have to wait and see, but it would be very exciting if it did happen.
Oh, I don't doubt that, and I'm sure they'll probably be looking at the doll funeral as well,
Sure, well, exactly. So it's I don't know. It's a long. I think it can take up to sort of 5 to 10 years to pull things into shape and make movies. I'm not sure. But, so I try not to think about it, but it would be nice if it happened.
I don't blame you. So, I'm sure our listeners are kind of curious, and your off time when you're not creating fabulous books, where do you get some of your inspiration for your upcoming works?
Oh, I think films. I watch a lot of films, and I find them very, very influential. And it just comes down to reading, really. And I'm just read, and that's got to be my biggest influence. I'm just always so curious and interested when I come across something which, still happens all the time. I think, wow, I've never read anything like this before. What a discovery. And so, yeah, reading and just passion for books, I suppose, really.
Well, I found it fascinating that you talked about how you have to see kind of like some of the storyline, visually see it in order
definitely.
to go forward. And Steven Spielberg does the exact same thing when he's creating.
Right.
Yeah, so he has to actually physically see that masterpiece take place in order to have it come to fruition. And I think it's just part of a creative genius that makes that happen.
I think I always feel very much when I'm writing that it's almost like kind of almost transposing what I'm seeing, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a very visual thing to me, very, very visual thing. And I know it's going well when it's really sharp and in focus, and there's even a bit of a score or something like that. I know I'm on the right track then.
Yeah, you're on the right path, and gosh, what great creativity to bring that forward,
Well, I suppose it's quite a strange existence, though, because you're in a room on your own.
Hey, but it's
things and
but what great company to keep, though, if you're doing the exact same thing Steven Spielberg is doing. I mean, my goodness.
Well, not necessarily the healthiest way to do it.
Well, and so, and I know you're working on your new book. Do you have any other plans for any other works going forward?
Yes, I do. I have ideas for a very clear idea for number 4 after this one. And I have ideas for less clear, but still quite focused ideas for number 5 and potentially number 6. So yeah, it's hopefully just keeping going with it.
Yeah, and moving forward, well, we can't wait to see what comes, off your writer's desk next. I mean, my goodness, you've got some amazing works coming forward. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, I've got a website which is www.katehamer.co.uk. I'm on Twitter for anybody that enjoys Twitter, Kate_Hamer. And I'm on Instagram as well. I'm just trying to remember my Instagram name. Oh,
that's okay. We'll show it so people can connect with you there as well, because I'm connected with you on Twitter, and I know you're also on Goodreads, where people can go and get involved.
Indeed, absolutely as well. I think all these things are great for both writers and readers, and there's just a terrific online community of basically people sharing the love of books.
Well, and it's so fun to kind of dive into the discussion in regards to your books, especially The Doll Funeral, and lots of people can do that on Goodreads. It's always fun to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be part of that community. And I'm connected with you on Twitter, and we're going to share all of your social media links as well. Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We're going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praag Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraag-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraag-grattan.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to answersunleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted to be introducing our next guest, Jennifer Egan, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, Manhattan Beach. So Jennifer is the author of The Invisible Circus. It's a novel that became a feature film with Cameron Diaz in 2001. Her most recent novel, A Visit from the Goon Squad, won the 2011 Pulitzer Prize, the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction, and the LA Times Book Prize. So let's welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Thank you. Oh, it is such a joy to have you here. My goodness, I mean, your book. Well, okay, so I guess we might as well start from the beginning. Like, what inspired you to write a historical novel?
Well, I usually begin with a sense of time and place. That's kind of my starting point. And I had found myself circling an idea I had of New York during World War II for years, really. I mean, since about 2004, I had been thinking that I wanted to look at that period and sort of dive into it. And I think maybe it really originated from 9/11, when overnight New York felt like a war zone and there was suddenly a strong military presence, and you know, you couldn't go below Canal Street, and I guess it really, maybe it just led to a curiosity about what New York was like during the Second World War. And so I followed that curiosity over really, 7 or 8 years, and it led me to many other places. First, the waterfront, because, that was obviously a time before air travel was the norm, and the water was how everything got everywhere and how everyone got everywhere. And that led me to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was an incredibly important part of the Allied war effort, and as it turned out, only 6 blocks away from my home. And then the Navy Yard got me into civilian diving, which I hadn't realized was an important part of ship repair, and also merchant shipping. And then the waterfront also really led me into organized crime, because it was a very corrupt place with lots of kind of institutionalized theft. I love gangsters. So, it started with an interest in New York during the war, and that kind of led me into all these other areas.
Well, and I love how you weaved, your book was so well written. I mean, it felt like the reader can just dive into it and be transported back into, that area in Brooklyn and, during World War II. And it was just so interesting. I loved how you write. And so for our listeners that are kind of a little curious, because we want everyone to go pick up their own copy of Manhattan Beach, so we're not going to dive too much into that. But why don't you share with us some of your process as a writer? Because, obviously, you won the Pulitzer Prize. This book has received so many accolades. And I'm sure people are just kind of curious, like, how do you get into your writing process, and what would that look like?
Well, I think for everyone, finding one's own process and honoring it is such a huge part of the challenge of becoming a writer, and it took me a while to figure out what mine was. And it's interestingly very different for fiction than it is for journalism, which I also do a fair amount of. So for fiction, I write my first drafts completely by hand, and I write them all the way through. So for Manhattan Beach, I wrote 1,400 pages by hand. And then I type it up, which took a few months in the case of 1,400 pages. But it's the same if I'm writing a short story. It's exactly the same, just on a smaller scale. I type it up, I read those typed pages, And of course, what I see there is a terrible mess, because what I've been writing by hand is a very intuitive, often kind of unconscious, very throat-clearing kind of outpouring that's not considered at all. And in a way, that's the point, because what I can figure out with my conscious mind is not good enough. I'm looking for what comes when my conscious mind isn't in control. So I read through those pages, which is pretty painful, frankly. And what I want to do is just find enough interesting stuff that tells me what this book sort of wants to be, and gives me an inkling of how to get it there. And so after I have that first draft, that's when I start really planning and organizing. That's when I make an outline, very detailed outline for revisions. And then I start revising, and the way I do that is mostly, again, by hand on hard copies. And so what I'll be doing is going chapter by chapter, and often at that early phase I'm reorganizing chapters and making big structural choices too. But I go unit by unit, and I do as many drafts as it takes to bring it up a notch, at which point I move on to the next segment. And I'm trying to get to a point where I have another big draft. And in the case of Manhattan Beach, the first draft took me about a year and a half. So that was just a year and a half of handwriting. And then the second draft maybe another year. And then I read through that. And hopefully it's significantly more developed than the first draft. And then I make a new outline, and I start revising again. I number my draft of the individual chapters so that, and I save everything for a while, so that if that thing happens where I feel like something just used to be better, and I'm not quite sure what happened to that goodness, I can go backward through my draft and actually locate an earlier version and hopefully, restore whatever got lost in the revision process. And I just keep doing that until the revision outlines get shorter, and the radical nature of the changes gets smaller. And I'm starting to home in on something that is more readable. And then at that point, I would go to outside readers. Although I should also mention that another really important part of my process from the very beginning is that I have a writing group. And we only read aloud. We don't look at anything on a page. But I bring stuff into them very early just to get a sense of whether it's alive, whether it has a voice, a pulse, things that I sometimes can't tell by looking at material on a page.
It must be just so great to use that group dynamics to get a better understanding of where you are in your writing process, like how far along your books would be.
Oh, I can't overemphasize how much I rely on that. I mean, for me, one of the big questions is always just, is the material alive? And sometimes I know the answer to that question just by reading it to the group before they've even commented. Because for example, when material is not alive, there is a particularly dead feeling one has in the room. And when it is alive, and sometimes that happens even when I'm not expecting it, there's a kind of quickening that I can feel, that we all can feel. And it's, I think for me, it's always great to remember that storytelling really began as an oral tradition, and the music and the rhythm of the language, really matter. And those are things that I am forced to attend to when I'm reading aloud that sometimes I might not be thinking about as much when I'm looking at it on the page.
Well, and so when you're doing your writing process and you're doing all this research for it, was there any information that just kind of surprised you as you were getting it together for this book?
I mean, there was so much I needed to know because the worlds of the book are many, and I knew nothing about any of them. So there's deep sea diving, merchant shipping, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and organized crime. There were a lot of things I didn't know about all of those. I mean, some surprising facts are, one thing I hadn't fully realized, although maybe I had an inkling of it from movies, was that gangsters, members of organized crime syndicates were accepted in polite society in the 30s and 40s in a way that is a little hard to imagine today. And that really grew out of Prohibition, because when alcohol became illegal and Americans still wanted to drink, organized crime really stepped in and became liquor distributors. And so that led to a kind of coziness with all kinds of, quote-unquote respectable people that carried on even after Prohibition ended. And so that was really interesting and kind of rich dramatically. So, for example, there was a guy named Frank Costello who was a known crime boss in New York, and he lived in a fancy apartment building on Central Park along with, movie stars and other, very well-known people, bankers, socialites. And, those people were bankers and socialites, and Frank Costello was a mob boss, and everyone kind of knew that. That was a little surprising to me, although in a way you can sort of tell from movies of the time that the gangster figure is kind of in a way, a sort of dashing romantic figure in a way that is not so true nowadays. So that was something that surprised me. I didn't know that deep sea divers could talk to each other if they touched their large cylindrical copper helmets. That was a wonderful surprise to me that I was able to use dramatically, because I have two divers at the bottom of the New York Harbor, and I was racking my brains trying to figure out how they could communicate. And then, kind of offhandedly, one of the divers I spoke to interview for the book mentioned that it was very easy to do this, and I couldn't have been happier. So there were surprises, little and big, that were nearly always useful to me in a dramatic way.
Well, it sounds like the research you did kind of drove the plot in your book.
It did, to some degree. It was a dialectic between them. I mean, since I begin with a time and place and I don't have a plot or characters, I write very intuitively and instinctively, but because there was so much technical knowledge that I didn't have, even as I was writing my first draft, I would have to have conversations, for example, with divers, because there was no way to describe deep sea diving without some basic knowledge of what was involved. And so talking to divers, then some of what I learned from them did inform the plot. But then as I began to understand the plot better, I had to go back and do more research. So there was a lot of flow between the two.
Did you find that living so close to the Navy Yard was kind of helpful in doing additional research for your book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it really mattered that I was right nearby it, but it certainly was helpful to be in the same city. Although, for example, I visited in San Francisco the Jeremiah O'Brien, which is one of two functional Liberty ships that still exists in America. And I am so grateful to that, to the ship, to the people who maintain her, and to the docents who volunteer their time, some of whom are actually World War II sailors. So, I will go wherever the action is, but it was quite helpful to have the Navy Yard so nearby.
Yeah. Well, and, it's so great when you can pull this history into a book, and especially as well as you've written Manhattan Beach. It just is such a delight to read, and you feel like you're just there, in the Navy shipyard in 1934, and it's almost where you could, just smell how everything is around the characters there, and you're actually embedded in the time that they're going through.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and you've got to be so delighted also with all the great accolades that your new book is getting, because everyone is absolutely loving it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm pleased. I don't really read reviews carefully because I just find that, sometimes negative things can really rattle through my head in a way that's not helpful. But I'm really happy that the book is finding readers, and I wondered what people who had loved Goon Squad, which was my last novel that really, in a way, found me a much larger audience than I had had before. I wondered what they would think about this, because it's not, it's not structurally tricky in the way that Goon Squad is. It's written in a more straightforward way, which is the only way I could find to really tell this story in a rich way that felt that I could really do it justice. So I'm happy that my readers are kind of rolling with me a bit on this. I'm very grateful.
Well, I'm sure everyone's very curious about what you're working on next, because most writers, they have several other projects in the mix as they have finished one.
Well, I was working on another first draft of something that I hope will be in my next book as I was working on this one, and I think that will be I hope, a kind of companion book to Goon Squad, in that I would like to use some of the peripheral characters from that book and see if I can follow them into a new realm that will be reminiscent of Goon Squad, but not at all the same. I don't want it to be about time or about music as that book was, but I would love to write another book in parts and see if I could take myself and my readers into a realm that feels interesting and new and rich, even though it has a relationship to the other book.
Oh, well, that sounds very exciting. I'm sure everyone's very curious when I know books take quite a while to go through the entire process, because especially if you're using a process where you're writing things down, it's very organic, and then moving from there, it's not something that's done in a year, I would think. It's probably a few years out.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how long, but I'm certainly going to be working hard on it and hoping there won't be a gap like this last time of 7 years. It's way too long.
Wow. We are delighted that you have this new book out, Manhattan Beach, and everyone needs to go pick up their own copy. And there's a reason why there's such a big buzz about this, but you have to pick up your copy to find out. So I know the book opens and is set in 1934, and you kind of alluded a little bit at why you picked kind of that time and the place. And it's interesting because there was a lot, you talk a lot about women working in the Navy Yard, and I really appreciated that.
Well, I was interested in the Navy Yard, as I said, because it was such an important part of the Allied war effort. But as soon as I started learning more about it, what seemed most interesting to me was the fact that for the first time in the history of the Navy Yard, which dates back to the Revolutionary War, during the war, thousands of women were employed there, and of course this was true in industrial environments all over the country. But it was really exciting to understand that story more from the inside. I mean, we all kind of have this Rosie the Riveter association, which was the propaganda, the marketing campaign that went along with basically trying to strongly encourage women to fill some of these jobs. But if you really, that were vacated by men going overseas to fight. But if you think about it, it's sort of amazing. I mean, these were things women had been told all their lives that they could not do. And now they were being begged to do those things. And it was such an exciting moment. I had wanted for quite a while to write a book that was explicitly about female strength. And I think part of that is my books have tended to skew male, since I don't usually use my own life or people I know. Sometimes an easy way to make sure that I'm not edging into my own life, which I find kind of boring, is to write from a male point of view. So it was really, I had for a long time thought that I just want to write a book about, in part, what it's like to be female in this world. And so I think when I started to, get deeper into the Navy Yard and how important women were there, in the industry of that place during World War II, it felt like the time to try to tell that story. That being said, I have 3 major protagonists, and 1 is female and 2 are male. So I guess you can say that I still ended up skewing a bit toward the male. I've got a lot from the point of view of a gangster named Dexter Stiles, and also quite a bit from the point of view of the father, who is a waterfront worker. So there are two men and one woman, but she is, I think, to some degree, the heart of the book.
Now, again, we don't want to dive too much into the book because we want people to pick up their own copy of Manhattan Beach. But I can easily see this book becoming a movie. I mean, it was so well written.
Oh, thank you. Well,
yeah.
Who knows? And that's one of the things that I have no control over. Movie rights usually do sell at some point, and I have sold the rights to this, but what I've learned from experience is that generally nothing happens. We'll see. I mean, my first book did become a movie, and that was a great experience. Cameron Diaz was in it. She did a wonderful job. It was a lot of fun, but I now realize how fluky that is, and unlikely because of just all the factors that have to come together to make a movie happen. So we'll see, but it would be a lot of fun. I would be the first to be thrilled if that took place.
Hey, I have a couple friends who are producers with some big studios, and we talk about different projects all the time, and that's why I bring this up, because your book is one that you can easily see would become a movie, kind of like your one with Cameron Diaz and just other great movies that are out there that have been derived from books. So it just makes sense,
Well, we'll see what happens. Well, hold that thought.
Hey, well, if it happens, we want you back to talk about it, for sure.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So what else do you have on the docket for you? Where else are you going from here with all of the great writing work that you do?
Do you mean what other projects I'm interested in doing?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Well, it's a little hard to talk beyond the next book, so I'm reluctant to do that, except to say that I also hope to, keep doing journalism. I like to write for the New York Times Magazine. But yeah, I mean, right now my sights are really set on this book that I already described, and I think in the future I would love to write another novel set outside my lifetime. I love the thought of trying to write about New York in the 19th century, but that is really kind of a distant, misty, goal right now. It's hard for me to think very concretely beyond the next project. But I'll probably start reading for that new one. And thinking about the research just as I began researching Manhattan Beach, back in 2004, which was very lucky actually, because a lot of the people I interviewed, longtime New Yorkers who had powerful memories of their childhoods in New York, and also women who worked at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a lot of those people were in their 80s in the first decade of the 21st century when I was interviewing them. So that was, I was able to really benefit from the very clear and remarkable memories of people some of whom are no longer with us. What's interesting about thinking about the 19th century is, of course, I'm not going to have anyone who can speak to that. It doesn't exist in living memory. And that's a strange thought, but also a lot of fun. So that's something that's kind of percolating out ahead, but I don't have anything very concrete to say about it yet. Just sort of beginning to ruminate on it and think about how I would approach it. But having now been writing outside of my lifetime, before my lifetime for some years, I'm excited to get back to contemporary life, which is what I'll be doing hopefully in the next book.
And the reason I bring that up is because I remember interviewing Mai Haley, which was the widow of Alex Haley a while back, and she had talked about how she had found a thread of a character for historical fiction and held on to them. That's really what drove one of her books. And so it's interesting to see the inspiration that authors get. And sometimes it can be something as small as, hearing of a story that's been written down in regards to an individual that brings the books alive,
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has their own entry point. For me, it is rarely a person, but it's more often a place, a time and a place. So when I say New York in the 19th century, obviously it's a very long time period, so I would want to try to isolate that a little bit more. But So I'm also really fascinated to hear what different writers end up seizing upon that leads them into a work of fiction. It's just very different for everyone. And for me, it's, this sense of time and place is huge. I mean, another time and place that really interests me actually are California during the 1960s. So a real novel of the counterculture. It would be a lot of fun to try to do that because although I was alive, I was just a little kid, so I had no direct experience of any of that. My parents weren't involved at all. So that's another sort of realm that I think would be fun to explore, but I don't know how. I just have to wait and sort of see what comes to me down the road, and see whether some sort of, whether if I sit down and start writing, characters and a story begin to evolve. It's a pretty mysterious process, I have to say. It feels sometimes very spiritual. I feel as if some of this is coming from outside. That's the sensation, but my organizational model, I guess, tends to be more psychological. So that's kind of why I think of it in terms of my unconscious or my subconscious. I feel like I know a lot more underneath my conscious mind than I know consciously. I often don't have very good ideas if I just sit down and think. I'll think of obvious things. So I'm looking for the things that I can't think of.
Ooh, love that. And there's so many great places in California that have that history and that culture that it would be easy to kind of dive in, especially in the 60s. So anytime you have a new book coming out or anything, movie, anything like that, we want to hear about it. We want to spend time with you here. So
sure.
So Jennifer, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about all the great stuff that you're doing?
Well, I have a new website that's going to be unveiled tomorrow morning. So JenniferEgan.com. It exists now in a very informational state, but if you look toward the bottom of the pages, you'll see ocean waves. And as of tomorrow morning, you will be able to go underwater into other kinds of material. So pretty much everything I'm doing is accessible that way.
Oh, that's, I was looking at this at your website, and it's very curious. It's like, go underwater. I'm like, and it just is so inviting. So I can't wait to see what this is going to look like tomorrow, and I'm sure our listeners will be checking that out as well. And of course, your book is available at all major retailers and bookstores, and of course on Amazon. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to tune in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.